Reservoirs of infection are sites where pathogens can survive and usually multiply until transferred to a host. Reservoirs can be non-living or living. Non-living reservoirs include things like air, soil, dust, food, and water. Living reservoirs can be non-human animals such as pets, wildlife, or insects. Human infectious diseases acquired from animals are sometimes called zoonotic diseases or zoonoses. There are many viruses present in bats that can infect humans, such as rabies and Ebola, and these are all considered zoonoses. If you're interested in this, there's a really good article in Wired that talks about the fact that bats are very good hosts for a number of different viruses that can infect humans. Ticks and other arthropods are also common reservoirs for some pathogens. The most important reservoir of infectious diseases would actually be other humans. In addition to the observably infected human hosts, there are asymptomatic carriers, often just referred to as carriers. These are colonized with a pathogen, but are not actually showing evidence of infection or disease, yet they can often transmit pathogens to other people. There have been efforts to try and completely eradicate certain pathogens causing human diseases. To do this, preventing people from acquiring the pathogen and eliminating it at its source is considered necessary. This is much more feasible when a pathogen does not have a reservoir beyond humans, as with smallpox and polioviruses. Smallpox has been eradicated with no new cases since 1977. There are current efforts underway to eradicate polio. When we talk about pathogen transmission, we're talking about the pathways that can allow pathogen transfer. There are different types of transmission mechanisms. Contact transmission is one type, and it can be broken down into direct, indirect, or by droplet. Direct contact usually means body contact between hosts. This would include skin-to-skin contact, as in shaking hands, or it could be contact between mucous membranes, as in sexual intercourse. It can also be contact between an infected animal and a human. Examples of pathogens that can be transmitted through direct contact would be things like the staphylococci and most agents involved in sexually transmitted infections. Indirect contact transmission involves fomites. These are contaminated inanimate objects or surfaces. Many objects can be fomites, including needles, toothbrushes, gloves, toys, and money. In a medical setting, this is a major concern for infection control. Hepatitis B and HIV are well known to be spread by contaminated needles. Droplet transmission allows transfer of pathogens through droplets of respiratory secretions, usually through sneezing or coughing. Most of the time, people need to be in very close proximity to acquire a pathogen from droplets. However, if the microbes can travel more than 1 meter in these respiratory droplets, we consider it to be airborne transmission, which I'll talk about shortly. In addition to transmission by contact, pathogens can be spread through vehicles or by vectors. Vehicles include air, drinking water, and food. We also consider bodily fluids handled outside the body to be vehicles when transmitting pathogens. Airborne transmission involves aerosols. Aerosols are clouds of very small droplets and/or solid particles suspended in the air. Aerosols can be from respiratory liquids that are sneezed or coughed, or from mechanical actions like sweeping, mopping, air conditioning, or through activities in a microbiology lab, like flaming and inoculating loop. There are a number of airborne pathogens such as measles, Mycobacterium tuberculosis, influenza, and chickenpox. Waterborne pathogens often cause gastrointestinal diseases, including cholera and amoebic dysentery. Foodborne transmission can result from pathogens in or on foods that were not properly processed, were undercooked, or poorly refrigerated. Some bacteria normally found in the normal microbiota, such as E. coli or Staph aureus, can contaminate food and lead to illness. Fecal contamination of food leading to disease is a type of fecal oral transmission, which is a route that we see in many types of diseases. Milk is normally pasteurized today as it's a rich source of microbial nutrients. Before widespread pasteurization, consumption of milk was associated with outbreaks of diseases like tuberculosis, diphtheria, and typhoid fever. Blood, urine, and other bodily fluids can also harbor dangerous pathogens, and precautions should be taken when handling such fluids. We'll discuss these precautions much more later. Vectors are animals that can transmit pathogens between hosts. These include biological vectors and mechanical vectors. In biological vectors, the pathogen is able to replicate and carries out at least part of its life cycle in that vector. Mechanical vectors basically carry pathogens from one host to another, and they do this in a passive way, usually on their surface. Examples of biological vectors include mosquitoes, which can transmit the malaria parasite and West Nile virus, just to name a couple. Deer ticks can carry the bacteria that cause Lyme disease, and the kissing bug is able to carry the Chagas disease trypanosome. When we're thinking about mechanical vectors, we often think about things like the common housefly or cockroaches, which can come in contact with contaminated materials and then introduce pathogens like Salmonella or E. coli into our food or onto skin. Nosocomial infections are acquired in a particular environment, and they're often called healthcare-acquired infections because of this. These are acquired by patients or healthcare workers in healthcare settings, which would include hospitals, medical clinics, dental offices, long-term care facilities, and even waiting rooms. We can break these down into different types of infections. In many cases, a person will be infected by a pathogen that they acquire from somebody else, and this is an example of an exogenous infection. In other cases, people actually have a pathogen present in their normal microbiota, and because of circumstances relating to hospitalization, they end up getting an infection caused by it. These are endogenous. There are also iatrogenic infections. These result directly from a medical procedure, typically something invasive where an infection results. In any case, there are a number of factors that lead to development of nosocomial infections. These include factors relating to the microorganisms themselves, which would include various pathogens present in the healthcare setting, some of which may be resistant to antimicrobial drugs. There are also factors relating to the host, and quite often, if somebody's in a healthcare setting, there's a good chance that their immune system has been compromised, or they may be undergoing procedures that put them at risk of infection. And finally, there are aspects of the chain of transmission. What we're talking about here would be transmission between the various people who are involved in a healthcare setting. These would include patients and healthcare workers, but even visitors could be part of this chain of transmission.